right, today we're going to go ahead and talk about solving equations that have exponents and square roots. And so one thing that you need to know is that the square root and the squared are opposites of each other. So if I want to cancel out a square, what I can do is I can go ahead and do the square root to both sides. Now, when I have a square in my original problem, that makes things a little bit complicated. So this problem is saying x squared equals 25. So what is x? So what number can I square to get 25? Well, hopefully we all know that I can square 5 to get 25. But there's also another number that I can square. And so I can also square negative 5. Negative 5 times negative 5 is also 25. So when I'm solving an equation and my equation has an x squared in it, I'm actually going to get two answers. So let's go ahead and practice this first one. So it says x squared equals 100. So to undo the square on the x, I'm going to go ahead and do the square root. So I would have x equals the square root of 100, which is 10, and then it also would equal negative 10. Looking at problem number 2, we want to get the x squared by itself. So to start, we're going to get rid of that 2 by dividing by 2. So x squared would equal 49. So now to get rid of the square, we're going to go ahead and take the square root, because that would allow this to cancel with this and leaves us with x. And the square root of 49 is 7 and negative 7. Looking at number 3, we want to get the x squared by itself, so we're going to go ahead and subtract 1 first. So x squared would equal 64. Going to take the square root, so x would be 8 and x would be negative 8. All right, and then number 4 here, we're going to go ahead, add 6. 3x squared would equal 60. We're going to go ahead and divide by 3. X squared would equal 20. We're going to take the square root. So x would be the square root of 20. Well, we're going to go ahead and break that down. So square root of 20 is the square root of 4 and square root of 5. So x would be 2 square root of 5, and x would be negative 2 square root of 5. So now the next thing that we're going to look at is we're going to look at having a square root around x. So I want to know if the square root of x is 25, then what is x? So just like above, the opposite of a square root is a square, and the opposite of a square is a square root. So to undo this square root, we're actually going to go ahead and square both sides. So this square cancels this square root and leaves me with x. I would take 25 squared, which is 25 times 25, which is 625. Now, unlike the ones above, this one only has one answer. Okay, there is not a square in my original problem. There's a square root, so there's only one answer. When we have a square in our original problem, that's when we get two answers. So practice problem number 1, we have the square root of the square root of x equals 9. So we're going to go ahead and square both sides. So that would cancel, so we would have x equals 81. If you look at number 2, that 5 is under the radical. So before I can touch it, I have to get rid of the radical. So I'm going to start by squaring both sides so that I can get rid of that radical. So this square would take away this radical and leave me with x plus 5 equals 2 squared is 4. Now I can solve for x. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 5. X would equal negative 1. All right, number 3 is similar to number 2. Everything with the w is under the radical. So before I can start adding and subtracting, I need to get rid of that radical. So to get rid of it, I'm going to square it. So 35 minus 2w. And then on the left side, 3 squared is 9. Now I'm able to start looking at getting w. So I'm going to use this two-step and solve down for w. So I'm going to subtract 35. So 9 minus 35 is negative 26. And on the right side, I'm left with just negative 2w. I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by negative 2. So w would be positive 13.